In my last video, I asked which decks of mine that you'd like to see. By far the most requested deck was this one, the First Strike Druids deck. It's been over a week since I last made it, and I apologize for the delay, but let's get into what makes this deck fun. First, this deck offers a whole bunch of units that make excellent trades. You've got, first of all, the First Strike units in the deck, the Were-Rat and Demon Hunter. If you can kill units for free, of course, that's an amazing trade. And I include Shadow Katana and Lunging Attack to further enhance this for other units as well. Now, if you pair that with Bestial Rage, you can sometimes take out 2 units for free in the same turn. But we'll get into more strategy with Bestial Rage in a moment. Now, I opt not to run Ronin in this deck, as Ronin is very weak on defense, and this deck struggles a little bit in the early game. It just makes things too tricky if you're relying entirely on First Strike aspect. Now, let's move on to win conditions. This deck's primary win condition is to outtrade and amass enough units on the board that you can take out their castle without them being able to trade back. You can use all sorts of different tools in many different combinations, which makes it quite a reliable deck. It's got some of everything that both of these factions have to offer. A few more notable cards here are Kuro the Assassin is excellent at taking out ranged units. The Beastmaster is an amazing card on defense. The Centaur can take out a bunch of buildings, and global buffs, of course, to add just value in the long-term investments. Now, I opt to take global buffs that have bonus health given to summoned units and not Blacksmith, just because of the other units I run. For example, Beastmaster getting 2 summons for free. If you buff their health, it goes on to the summoned units, and this is especially true for Liana. Having her Treants with Spirit Link having extra health is hugely beneficial. Mordok summons a unit on combo, and Manticore benefits from this quite a bit as well. It also pushes Demon Hunter above 4 health, which is great for resisting burns. Now, what about the weaknesses for this deck? As with many ninja decks, primary weakness for this deck is swarm decks. If you're facing up against a swarm deck, you're going to have to hope that you can outposition them, or that they don't play as well as you do, because what they should be doing is rushing their units forward but not attacking. And with this deck, you can only attack as many times as you have units, which tends to be a rather small amount on the board. There are other strategies that you can use to overcome this, but you should also know to watch out for decks that feature any sort of burn. And lastly, I'd like to talk about some strategies with Bestial Rage and legendary substitutions. So let's go with the legendary substitutions first. If you don't have Fat Bard, that's alright. You can switch him out for a Blacksmith, and you'll have a similar effect. The Kuro can be swapped out for any other similar costing unit. Try and emphasize for something that can trade well, and mobility is a bonus. The Beastmaster is probably the hardest one to swap out. He provides so much defense to this deck. If you really can't get him then I might recommend a Rat King or some other similar unit that can put on a lot of defense. Mordok is probably the easiest one to swap out. If you don't have a Mordok, since this deck is weak against Swarm, I would recommend a Swordsman, and that would cover up one of the weaknesses, or you can go with a Northlands Ranger, and that would provide a good substitution as well. And Archer Lyanna makes this deck so much more fun. I highly encourage you to use her. If not, you could try and get other high-cost units to substitute. And lastly, Bestial Rage. The best targets to put Bestial Rage on are, of course, the Demon Hunter, the Were-Rat if you give it a Shadow Katana or enough global buffs to make it strong enough to make good trades. The Wizard benefits a lot from Bestial Rage, and of course Kuru and Mordok too. When you have it on these units, it's best to attack and then retreat, as you don't want to be staying in enemy territory where they can freeze you or use their own Manticore, for example, to make a quick trade and kill off your powerful unit. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll try and answer them there. And the second deck I'd like to feature is a deck that I call Good Greed. Now, this is similar and inspired by the classic Greed deck with School, except you'll notice that this deck does not have any School of Knowledge. Instead, it's just got a bunch of good stuff and a lot of reliable draw cards to benefit from the gold gain. Of course, it's not quite as much gold gain as School, but it trades off the potential power for strong reliability, and in my opinion is stronger than a traditional School deck. So what makes it strong? Let's take a look. This deck, as if you've ever played a School deck before or played against one, you'll know that the benefit of this color combo is the pirates give you plenty of treasure, and the crusaders give you plenty of draw. And since there are 50 cards in a deck and you almost never run out, this allows you to get an edge over your opponent and dominate. Win conditions for this deck are exactly that. You get an early lead and keep it, and don't let the enemy come back. It scales alright, but it's not the best scaling. If you encounter a War Party or an Awaken deck that gets to drawing cards, you'll be in some trouble. The weaknesses for this deck are if you don't get an early lead, if somehow the opponent gets the advantage in the early game, then you'll be in a bit of trouble. It's tricky to come back. It doesn't have too many great defensive cards, but luckily that's not too common of an occurrence based on how many early game cards I've put into this deck. So let's take a look at some specifics here. Now, all of these cards are top tier or close to top tier. Lumberjack is an auto-include. Dagger Storm is best to be saved for ranged units. You've got Elvish Thief and Priests are auto-include, as well as Rat Hovel. Since you'll be swarming a bunch of units, including the rats here, Blacksmith and Armory are included. Great investments with the Southport Captain's extra treasure. We have Flying Books for draw, Tarius here, and Craxus. If you find that you're going through the deck too fast, you can substitute one of the clerics for a flying books. But a cleric is such a strong unit on its own, especially if you get a couple of blacksmiths or armories. You can just heal up indefinitely. I've included 2 Dwarven Scopes. Try and only put these on cards that are Tarius or above, as it's most beneficial on them. This Reclaim is a required card, as enemies who are running any decks that are building reliant, such as Awaken decks or Trap decks, this is the only way to destroy their building. Well, not quite the only way, but it's the most reliable way for sure. Tarius is a great card. Try to keep him in the back lines for extra draw. I don't run 3 of him, as if you're facing opponents who can deal with it reliably, then he can just be a gold sink. Southport Cannoneer, I feel, is underrated. Very strong card and provides all the range that this deck needs. Dread Pirate for extra treasure. Frog Prince, also a great card. Craxus, and Mercenary Execution, and then the Arbiter's Return is the healing portion of this deck. I opt to take it over Hands of the Saint and Church because it can deal with global buffs and other buildings in the back, whereas it's not easy to get to those, as it is, for example, a burn deck or a druid deck with companions. Now, if you are looking to substitute legendaries, this is probably not the best deck for you. The deck is a bit of an expensive one. The Tarius, Arbiter, and Craxus are quite required. Without Robins, you just don't have enough gold gain, but you can make substitutions if it's absolutely necessary. Instead of Tarius, you could be running Divine Knowledge or Dragon Crest Shield, or another Flying Books. Instead of Robins, try to get something that has other gold gain or just an expensive card. Craxus is required, you can't substitute him. And the Arbiter's Return, you could be running Hands of the Saint or Church, but it will not be as strong as the Arbiter, in my opinion. Anyway, hope you have success with these decks. Best of luck, and I'll see you next time.